Welcome to this recording of the Creative Industries Briefing, which was delivered as part of the Creative Careers Festival. My name is Adrienne Jolly. The idea behind this session is just to give you an overview of the creative industries and ideas about where to begin your research. So I'm going to begin with some definitions. I'm going to talk a little bit about the creative industries and the creative economy, and then looking at research and how you start the process of researching the industries that you're interested in. I'll then talk a little bit about identifying and developing skills and also crossing over from one sector into the creative industries. I'll touch on freelancing because it's quite significant within the creative industry sector. And then finally, talk a little bit about work experience and starting points, schemes and support. In terms of definitions, I've used the Creative Industries Federation definition of the creative industries. Creative Industries Federation is a lobbying and promotional organisation that supports the UK creative industries sector. And interestingly, they choose to include crafts, museums and music within their definition. Sometimes you'll find that that's separately classified as the cultural and creative industries. So it's just worth kind of bearing in mind that different organisations will define the sector as a whole in slightly different ways. But as you can see, some of those core activities of advertising, film and media, publishing, IT, games and software, they're all included in this particular definition of the creative industry sector. And the creative industries is a valuable sector within the United Kingdom, as indeed it is across the world. So in 2022, the last full set of figures from the DCMS, which is the UK Department of Culture, Media and Sport, the UK creative industries grew by 6.8%, so more than twice as fast in 22 as the UK economy as a whole. It accounts for 5.7% of total UK gross value added, with the IT, software and computer services subsector as the main contributor to that, so 53 billion in 22. Film, television and radio and photography are the second largest subsector, contributing 20.8 billion in 2022. So it's a really significant sector for the UK. It's worth thinking about the difference between the creative industries or roles within the creative industry and those within the wider creative economy. So what do we mean by that? So the creative industries is a sector in and of itself. As I've mentioned already, we're looking at marketing and publishing and film and television and media. So organisations that work within the creative industries and define themselves as creative industries businesses. The creative economy is where you find creative industries activities taking place in other sectors. So looking at this Venn diagram, you could be working, for example, as a copy editor in the publishing industry. So you would be working in a creative industry in a creative role. So that's the centre, the overlap in the Venn diagram. To the left, in the purple on the Venn diagram, you could be working as a production accountant, for example, for a film company. So your job is not creative, but you're working within the creative industries. And then on the right-hand side of the screen, you could be working in a creative job, for example, a communications officer, but doing that in a corporate organisation or public sector organisation. So, for example, you could be a press officer or internal comms officer in a university. So the job's creative, the industry isn't. The reason I mention this is that there are many, many very creative roles that are available to you within the corporate sector, the public sector, the charity sector. So different areas of the economy that don't define themselves as creative. It may be the financial services, it may be environmental, it might be in tourism, for example. None of those are creative industries, but there are many very creative jobs taking place within those industries. And it's also worth thinking about how you might cross over from a non-creative industry into a creative industry. And I'm going to be talking about that in a moment. One of the challenges, I think, with the creative industries is they're quite difficult to research. There aren't a significant number of graduate programs or schemes available in the creative industries. It's made up of many small and medium-sized enterprises. There are many aspects to the industry that rely on freelancing and entry-level roles, so it can be a difficult place to start really researching and understanding. So I've pulled together here some standard, what I would call graduate level resources. These are very good starting points for your thinking. And I'll go on to talk about more focused creative industry resources in a moment. So on the careers website, our own service website, you will find an A to Z of careers, and within that you will see brief sector overviews for publishing, journalism, media, marketing, etc. So we've broken those down with a little bit more information. There's also lots of other resources there, and I'd absolutely encourage you to sign up to the relevant industry newsletters, and you can find the link to that on the website. Target Jobs and Prospects are quite similar sites. They both advertise graduate level roles. They both have sector overviews and guides to different roles and introductions to different industries. So they're a good starting point. We quite often use Prospects as a starting point because the role profiles are nice and detailed and consistent, and they offer lots of very useful information when you're trying to understand what goes on within a particular sector or within a particular job type. I'm going to be touching on that again in a moment. Handshake, of course, is a resource that you can use to view vacancies, but also it's where you will book onto events, sign up for newsletters, look at resources, and we have another creative industry resource listed on Handshake as well. And then finally, I've included the Bright Network. They as well have sector overviews for different roles. It's not as comprehensive as Prospect and Target Jobs, but they do have a couple of useful listings. For example, marketing, graduate schemes. They keep a sort of rolling directory of what's being advertised in one place. So it can be a useful site just to add to your research. These are all sites that I would recommend above using something like Indeed, which is, I think, a very difficult site to navigate when you're trying to research and search for jobs. And certainly better than LinkedIn in the sense that it's bringing information together very much with a student and graduate focus in mind. The other really good starting point for research are professional associations. Most professions have got a professional association. It's how they maintain their standards, it's how they share information about what's happening within that profession, it's how they lobby sometimes about developments and needs for the profession, and it's also how they define the professional pathways and qualifications for that profession. So really very helpful if you have a sense of where you want to go and you want to understand that a little bit more. So looking at the professional association websites, you will find current news, current talking points, issues. Helpful if you are preparing an application and you want to be aware of some of those issues and news and developments, but certainly as well in preparing for interviews. So commercial awareness, really, really useful. Many of them also do have jobs boards and many are free to view. And this is somewhere where the industry is advertising to itself. And so it's a very good way of assessing entry-level ranges of roles, job titles that the industry are choosing to use of and for itself. As I mentioned, qualifications are one of the key things with professional pathways and professional associations. So many professional associations have developed their own accredited qualifications, and most of those are qualifications that you can undertake whilst working in role. So for example, the Chartered Institute of Marketing is an organisation that accredits a Chartered Institute of Marketing certificate and diploma, and these are things that can be done alongside your work within a marketing role and are often supported by the employer in terms of supporting with fees. And a lot of these will have their own careers pages. The IPA, the Institute of the Professions of Advertising, is a really good example of this. It's got quite detailed careers pages on the IPA website. And most of the content for these websites is free to access. There are resources and reports and research that are behind a paywall even, but it's worth just checking how much information you can access depending on the professional association you're looking at. If you're not sure, you can have a look at the Directory of Professions. This is the UK site, but there are similar directories in other countries, and you quite simply search for the particular profession that you're looking for and it will direct you to the right professional association or body. So I really recommend them as starting points to understand what the industry is saying to itself. And digging a little deeper in your research, it can be quite challenging to get consistent information about what specific roles look like. What's the day-to-day? What kind of skills are being required here? And that's often because particularly internship applications can be really brief in detail. You might only get 3 or 4 lines of the kind of person they're looking for, so not a comprehensive person specification. And also, each are very different to each other, so it's quite challenging sometimes to compare and contrast what is effectively the same job as described by different organisations or employers. So prospects is a quite nice way of doing this because it is consistent. Every profile is structured in exactly the same way. Each profile has a list of responsibilities, which is effectively your job description. And as you can see here, there's a job description or responsibilities section for the advertising account executive. You could then look at the advertising copywriter profile and compare what does the day-to-day of this job look like compared to the other. So that consistency can really help you understand a little more about the differences between each of these roles. And then they go on to give a list of skills, which is effectively your person specification. So we've got 2 here, one for translator, one for editorial assistant, and it just gives you that kind of overview. What are the general skills that are being asked for when we look across a range of examples of person specifications and bring the common denominators together? But the profiles also give information about career development, professional qualifications, vacancy sites, career progress. So really comprehensive if you want to dig down right the way through that profile. The other thing that the profiles can be very useful for are if you're applying for a role and it does have a very limited job description and person specification, you can have a look at the equivalent profile on prospects and see if there's anything else that you can add to your application to really kind of build up and respond to the day-to-day of that role. And if you're making a speculative application, for example, you would really like to get some work experience in public relations, you can use the public relations role profile to basically build a targeted and tailored CV, even though you don't have a job description to work for. So it's really useful as a resource just to sense check, to compare, to dive a little bit deeper, and to fill in gaps in your knowledge or in the resources that you've been given by an employer. Once you understand a bit more about the skills that are being asked for, you can start thinking about how you can develop those skills whilst you're at Cambridge and beyond. So in terms of practical experience while studying at Cambridge, your degree is just the start of this. So think about how you can get involved in societies, networking opportunities, employer briefings, work experience, and summer internships. If you can achieve a role within a society where you're practicing an area that you want to take forward in your career, then that's fantastic. Take those opportunities and build on them. You can use LinkedIn, career service events, meetups, college events, any opportunity to get in front of alumni and ask them, how did they do it? What would they recommend as a starting point? Now that they're working in this industry, what do they regret not knowing when they first started? Was there a skill they should have really developed? Was there a piece of software that would have really helped them? So just using those connections, building yourself a network, is a really good way of filling in some of that knowledge gap. And I've popped a link up here to the short video about how to use alumni on LinkedIn, how to actually access alumni and make those requests and connections. Some knowledge is good. So by that I mean knowing other parts of the industry that you want to get into. So for example, if you understand a little bit about coding, that's going to actually help you if you want to write narrative for games. So knowing what you're asking the coders to do. And quite often actually you're asked to submit a short example of coded material as part of your application, even though you want to write the narrative. If you're interested in working in social media marketing, having experience of posting and creating content is great, but can you also understand and operate some of the scheduling and analytics tools? So you don't have to become an expert, but understanding where you fit in the wider industry can be super useful. If, for example, you're working as an editorial assistant in publishing, knowing the different stages of a book's journey through from manuscript to bookshelf and knowing where you fit in that particular process and how that relates with operations and production and layout and editing and design and publicity and sales, just understanding that bigger picture and being able to talk about it can be really beneficial. Access training basically wherever you can. A lot is free. I've just mentioned publishing. The Society of Young Publishers has got some fantastic resource around the industry, helping you to understand and navigate it further, as does the Publishing Association. But also you've got courses on LinkedIn that are free to access as a Cambridge student, and also Coursera and other resources that are free and accessible. Even if you don't get a formal qualification, including the fact that you've been proactive and undertaken these courses is a really positive thing on your CV. And outside of your time at Cambridge, think about how you can build further. So if you have been interviewed, whether or not successful, if you've managed to secure work experience or undertaken an internship, try and get feedback. Ask your host, were there gaps that you need to address moving forward? What strengths did you bring to your internship or work experience placement? Or what strengths do you think needed to be developed if you didn't succeed at interview? What advice would you give for that next step? So do follow up. It can be hard with interviews, and we appreciate that. It can take some persistence to get meaningful feedback from an interview. But any activity that you've undertaken, gather that feedback, reflect on it, and think, how can I put that into practice? And going back to professional bodies, many professional bodies have got student membership, and they're usually heavily discounted. So the Museum Association, £30 a year for student membership. So that can give you additional access, also opportunities potentially to volunteer at conference or to get involved in projects, but if nothing else, just giving you that extra level of access. Sometimes that gives you access to more vacancies, etc., etc. And sector skills councils, which in this instance would be something like Screen Skills, which covers all of the film, television and media industries, are free. It's a free site to access, absolutely essential for anybody who's looking at that particular part of the creative industries. It is full of incredibly valuable resource, as is the Creative and Cultural Skills Council, which is aimed at more of the theatre, performance, etc. So use sector skills councils and professional bodies, and if you can afford that student membership, as I say, usually highly subsidised, then weigh up whether or not it actually would be beneficial for you to do so. And finally, if you want to be creative and make creative content, whether that's film, copy, creative writing, radio, podcasts, whatever it is, be prepared to share your work. So sharing things on LinkedIn, so sharing your portfolio, sharing an example of a short film, creating an online portfolio that you can embed in your CV, making sure that work is out there so people can see examples of it. It also allows you to be reflective. So, for example, if you're really interested in content writing and driving sales through effective written communication, then you can actually set yourself tasks on your portfolio and say, today I decided to write a 600-word piece about this. Or if you're interested in journalism, set yourself a journalistic task. It may not be published in a university newsletter or newspaper, doesn't matter. Set yourself the activity and narrate that and frame it within your portfolio. Again, particularly with film, television and media, competitions are great. Keep an eye out for competitions. We have a competitions page on Handshake, so you can see anything that's happening within Cambridge that we think would be a really good thing for you to look at, often around creative writing. Film competitions, a great way to get your work out there. So just do some research, look and see if there are areas where you can enter as a student or just simply as a creative, and get your work recognised. And finally, think beyond the creative. The commercial awareness and business knowledge is important and it's valued. If you wanted to work in publishing and you simply said, I love books, it's not going to get you to interview. It's understanding that publishing is a business, and that it operates under all of the constraints that any business operates under, and actually having an awareness of your pace in the process, how it all fits together, what the market looks like, for the kind of books you're interested in, just understanding that and communicating that you have some commercial awareness and potentially any experience around customer service or project management or planning will help you as well. I mentioned crossing over, and what I mean by this is accessing hard to access industries by taking a sideways step. So going somewhere to develop the skill set and then taking it back into the creative industries or the cultural industries at a later point. So a couple of examples here. A graduate who carried out their Vodafone graduate scheme place, and at the end of their rotation they worked in marketing and communications. So having gained a significant amount of commercial experience in marketing and comms, they sideways moved into publishing, which is where they wanted to be all along. So they just took that detour into marcoms in the commercial sector and then moved it sideways. Another example, somebody who developed their administrative skills working in a university, really honed and gathered all of the administration skills that they needed and took those on a sideways move into an arts organisation. So they had everything that they needed, they just translated it into the industry they wanted to be a part of. And there's a video here that you might want to watch later, which is Kerry Radden, who, similarly to the Vodafone graduate, worked in corporate marketing and is now working as head of audience and marketing at the Royal Shakespeare Company. So I think it's a really interesting concept to consider. I need to mention freelancing in portfolio because it's so significant in this sector. So just to clarify terms, somebody who is self-employed, you're working for yourself, you're offering goods or services, but you're not necessarily contracting your work through others. So you are either generating content or creating a product, and you're taking that out to market. Within that, freelancers are self-employed, again, not necessarily contracted to one employer for a set length of time, but they may be working for more than one business or organisation at the same time. So a really good example of that is a literary translator or a copy editor. You may be working on multiple projects at the same time for different publishers. Contracting, still a form of self-employment, but you're working exclusively for one employer for a set time. So you may be undertaking 2 or 3 discrete projects through the course of a year. Really good example of that is web design. And then finally, portfolio. So a combination of self-employment and part-time work to basically help you to establish that more creative career. So you could be working on a cheese stall 3 days a week, and then that's earning you enough to then do a little bit of freelance writing and giving you a tiny bit of time every week to actually work on that novel that you want to get published. So gradually trying to then tip the balance towards more of the creative work. Why does it matter? Up to 46% of freelancers in certain industries, television being the big one. So it may be your norm. Explore it sooner rather than later. And even if you're not freelancing, there are certain industries, and I would use the museum sector as an example here, where often contracts are quite short. So you may be looking at 6 months to a year long contract. So actually you are really always looking out for the next opportunity, as any self-employed person might be. It is very important to note that if you're on an international student visa, you must not freelance while studying. And I say this because some, particularly over the summer, if people are able to get freelance running work in television, you're able to do that as a student, but not if you are on an international visa. So please be very cautious of that and check absolutely what you can and cannot do when it comes to employment in the UK while you're studying. So a couple of examples: a portfolio arts worker, so somebody who's managed to land a 6-month full-time contract with an arts festival. That's an annual cycle. They often do employ people for just short contracts like 6 months. And so they use the rest of their 6 months doing agency administration, so non-arts work, so working outside of the creative industries altogether, but building more arts work portfolio into their year as they progress, and eventually hopefully working full-time for the festival that they want to work for, or working across 2 festivals. A portfolio writer, somebody who works part-time writing web copy, so something very commercial, very business facing. They may do a little bit of freelance pitched writing as well. So they may be actually working with a couple of agencies to pick up some freelance writing, or directly with publications. And then in their spare time, they're working on their own creative projects. So maybe we're back to completing that novel or working on that screenplay. And then the third most common is the self-employed freelance runner. That tends to be found in the film and television industry. So 100% of the work is sourced through freelancing, short contracts, trying to minimize the gap between contracts, maybe building a relationship with a handful of production companies and producers, so that it's easier for them to pitch roles, but constantly looking for the next job to come along, as is the case with a lot of that industry. Obviously, there are people who are fully employed within that industry, but a lot of work that's done by independent production companies, they will be bringing freelancers on as and when they need them. And finally, on freelancing, just a handful of job titles. So documentary filmmaker, freelance writer and dramaturge, radio and podcaster, producer, so a whole range of things that Cambridge alumni are working at this moment on as freelancers. So it's definitely a thing that you need to think about. At least be aware that an opportunity that looks really exciting may be freelance, so you need to understand how to actually manage that process. Work experience and actually getting into the industry. So while you're at Cambridge, as I've mentioned before, look for any opportunities to write, promote, negotiate, organise anything through college events that will help you to build your CV. Come along to everything that we can offer you in terms of creative careers events and briefings and employer talks, and engage with those alumni and employers and begin to build that network. And I really recommend that you have a look at our skills discovery toolkit, and this is a self-assessment questionnaire that helps to look across all elements of common employability skills required by employers, and identify where there may be areas that you need to strengthen your skills, and also recommendations for how you might do that whilst you're at Cambridge. So it gives you some ideas to help you get started. And outside of Cambridge, build your skills. Think about how you can develop your LinkedIn network. And remember, if you're feeling slightly anxious about the idea of reaching out to Cambridge alumni and asking them for their tips, their advice, their experience, it will probably be something that happens to you 5 years down the line. Somebody's going to tap you on the shoulder via LinkedIn and say, hello, I hope you don't mind me getting in touch. I'm a current student at Cambridge. I see that you went to Cambridge and you also studied the same discipline as me. And I'm really interested in the job that you do, and I'd love to just have 5 minutes to ask you a couple of questions. So what you're asking of them may well be questions that come back to you a few years down the line. Look out for opportunities to network and to attend workshops and conferences. Society of Young Publishers, the Museums Association, lots and lots of opportunities out there. And again, starting from those professional associations and networks, they can give you a calendar of things that you might be able to get involved with, as long as obviously they're not clashing with your studies. Maybe think about making some speculative applications. Could it be meeting somebody for a coffee and asking them a bit more about what it's like to work in podcasting, or actually talking to somebody who's working in a corporate environment about videography, and just getting more of an understanding of how they got into that role and what their recommendations might be. So be prepared to make speculative applications, be prepared for people not to get back to you, and some people will just say no, but some people will say yes. And they may offer you a day of shadowing, and a day of shadowing may lead to a couple of weeks of work experience or the opportunity to apply for an internship or for a role. So push, nudge at the door, just to see where that takes you. And if you do meet somebody, do please follow up with them. If they say connect with me or drop me an email, please do that, because they've invited it of you. And it's great to build that network. And certainly with LinkedIn, the more you build a network, the more people you can see and access and ask questions of. And if you are a creator, as I said earlier, think about the portfolio. Do you need to house your work somewhere? Do you need to be able to direct somebody to examples of your work? And if so, how are you going to do that? So be creative, be bold. The worst that can happen is that somebody doesn't get back to you, or they say, no, sorry, I can't help you this time. That's the worst that can happen, really. So be prepared to put yourself and your work out there. A little bit about common routes. Graduate schemes are uncommon. There are graduate schemes in publishing and marketing, and there are traineeships in journalism. The BBC have now moved over to apprenticeship, level 7 apprenticeships. There are opportunities out there in a more structured training program sense, but they aren't as common as some of the other sectors like business and finance. So you need to think laterally. Going back to the Vodafone example, think about whether you have a sideways move and develop a skill set that you can then take within the creative industries if that's the way you want to play it. Keep an eye out for the schemes, get help from us, get feedback on your applications, use the Career Service website and our guides on CVs and applications and interviews, etc., because they will be competitive. So please do access the Career Service and all of the support that we can provide you with. Many of these employers come under the small and medium-sized enterprise banner, particularly agencies, creative agencies, some publishing houses. So be aware of small and medium-sized enterprises. They can be great. They don't offer graduate schemes per se, but they're places where you can really work across a range of teams and departments. You can get involved in quite a range of activity, but it's hard to find them. If you look on our digital publications page on our website, you'll see a guide to working with SMEs that might be useful. And also using LinkedIn for company searches can be great. So for example, if you find the name of a really interesting production company in London and look that up and search by company, actually LinkedIn will suggest similar companies. So actually doing company searches on LinkedIn can help to narrow down places that you might want to research. And of course, with a lot of the creative industries, you can trace back the producer from the product. So if it's a particular television program, or it's a particular writer, or a particular website, you can actually trace back who built that, who made that, who produced that. And so it's great that you can take a lot of this back to source. And in terms of routes, going back to prospects, know the entry-level job titles for your preferred industry. So editorial assistant, runner, marketing assistant, junior advertising, etc., executive, etc. Different job titles for different industries, but also the different job titles between the creative industries and the creative economy. So what I mean by that is somebody wanting to work in public relations, in a public relations agency in the creative industry, the equivalent role in an organisation outside of the creative industry, so for example in education or local government, would be communications officer. So it's kind of the same job, lots and lots of similarities certainly between those two jobs, but they've got slightly different job titles. So again, using the prospects profiles, you can just get to grips with those different job titles and you get a sense of what you're searching for. Internships, anything over 4 weeks with a private profit-making organisation should be paid. There's a big attempt to move away from unpaid internships in the charity sector, but they still do exist, and they are trying to pay stipends or expenses. But just be aware of what you are being asked to do with an internship, and particularly an unpaid internship. There are paid internships, but again, in the creative industries, they are quite challenging to find, and they tend to be more in the business facing end of things, so working in marketing agencies, for example. What we are finding is that the move away from London continues. Some of that is to do with drivers by government. So for example, a big push 5 years ago to move television production out of London, with the establishment of the Leeds hub in Channel 4 and the Glasgow hub, and the expansion of the Salford BBC hub and the expansion of the Bristol hub. So we're seeing a much more of a regionalisation in certain industries, and certainly with film and television generally, there is a Pennine curve that goes from York across the Pennines down to Liverpool, and there's a real cluster and really kind of lots of joined up thinking in the north about film and television production up there. COVID has helped with this, so certainly remote and hybrid working for those professions where it's possible are becoming more and more common. And finally, a word about masters. You may choose to take a master's and to use that to specialise slightly within your preferred area of the creative industries. Particularly common are museums, journalism, publishing, translation and broadcast. It's worth considering whether the master's that you're pursuing is accredited. Certainly with things like broadcast journalism and newspaper journalism, to have accreditation from the BCTJ or the NCTJ are really useful to consider. Publishing, there are some accredited masters that are accredited by the Publishers Association, so just be aware that that is a thing. The reason it can be worth considering is because accreditation often means a compulsory space in the master's programme to include a placement, and so industry engagement as part of the master's. But it's entirely up to you kind of where you take your master's, but certainly think about why that area is of interest to you and whether that accredited, more vocational route could be better for you. And finally, there are schemes and support around to support people into the creative industries. There is a real push to improve access to the creative industries and to ensure that it's a more representative industry and is really trying to bring some barriers down, because traditionally it has been very much the provinces of, I guess, the middle classes primarily. So we've got some really interesting programs like Women in Games, very good support network with opportunities for development, really great advice. Women in Radio, similarly, good careers advice, good support network. Creative Access doesn't just advertise what are called ring-fenced opportunities that are there to help with diversity and diversification of the industry, but there are other opportunities more generally available on site, but a really, really good source of opportunities. And then you've got things like Equal Access, Book Trade Charity, Spare Room, great project to help people actually relocate to London if you're on a low income. And you can find all of our equality, diversity and inclusion resources on the Careers Service website. So, resources and starting points. I hope this has given you a few ideas to take your research further. As I've mentioned before, there's an additional resource on Handshake, and there is an additional resource on the Careers Service website A to Z. Please sign up for our industry newsletters. We don't bombard people, but you can get regular newsletters covering many aspects of the creative industries, as well as disability and and equality and women in careers, lots of different things going on in our newsletters. So please just have a look on the website, sign up to the newsletters that interest you. Make a one-to-one appointment if you want to explore this a little more, if you want feedback on an application. We're here to support you in that process. The main Creative Careers Festival takes place in Lent term, and we will be contacting people through departments and through newsletters and social media marketing, etc., etc. So do sign up, come along. It's an opportunity for you to network with those Cambridge alumni and meet employers who are actually really interested in finding out what our students are interested in and helping you to develop the skills that you need to develop. So we also have separate employer skills sessions. Keep a lookout for those. It may be that an interesting employer is coming onto campus or running a hybrid session, and you can learn a bit more about what's needed to access that industry. And finally, we have Careers Essentials, online and term time workshops that can help you develop your career management skills. So CV writing, applications, interviews, choosing a career, applying for masters, lots and lots and lots of things there in both recorded and live form. So keep an eye out for our Careers Essentials. We advertise all of these things on Handshake. So that was an introduction to the creative industries. I hope it's given you some starting points, and please do remember, stay in touch with the Career Service. We're here to help you in developing your career thinking and planning and moving forward in the chosen career for you. Thanks a lot.